All right, hello and welcome, guys, back to the next episode of our F1 24 career mode here in F2. It's a 2023 season in F2. If you guys watched the last episode, please go ahead and make sure you do if you haven't. It was a pretty good weekend. I was happy that the sprint and feature race format was fixed and working for this year's game. But I did want to recap a little bit. I don't quite remember if I went over it during the race. But currently there is a bug where you don't get any safety cars, red flags, and I believe engine failures. I'm not quite sure. I haven't really looked into it to see what some of the other YouTubers who do F1 have experienced about it. I know Owen, Formula Owen, has put something about that in the comments of his videos. But yeah, so we went ahead and finished our practice, and we're gonna go ahead and get right into qualifying here for the sprint and the feature race here in Jeddah. Alright, so first time around in Jeddah on the super softs. To let off the gas a little bit too much there with these tires. The back end coming out. We had a lot of the back end coming out during practice as we're coming across the line. We're going to be getting a 1:44.0. I'm feeling pretty good about this time, but that's going to be a different situation here.
The grid is set then, so that just leaves the race itself. Join us tomorrow where we'll be live with all the action, and until then, goodbye.
All right, so real quick, after qualifying, you can see 1.1 is the gap, and it seems like I did bump the difficulty down by half a second. I was half a second behind. I was like P8, P9, like around a second back behind the leaders in practice, but I believe that's how it is between practice and qualifying, so I have to be very careful about that through the rest of the season, because we don't need mistakes like this, where makes it a little bit too easy for us. So we're going to be bumping up the difficulty, let's say 7/10 or so, and go from there, see how we do for the sprint and the feature race. So we're going to be starting in P10. Let's get to it.
So it's all about speed in today's sprint race then. Not very many laps and no chance to get ahead on strategy. Who here today has the raw skill to take them to the top? So let's examine the Jeddah Street circuit. As you can see, this has the potential to be a very challenging track for our young F2 drivers. We'll get a good chance to see which of them have been able to best capitalise on their time spent here in practice earlier this weekend. And like the other street circuits on the calendar, the lack of runoff is going to make sections of this track very punishing if the drivers get it wrong. Let's hope we avoid having to bring out the safety car this time around. And we welcome you to the Formula 2 commentary box. I'm Alex Jakes. Alongside me for this one, Alex Brundle. It is a sprint race. It is race day. How much can you take from that one-lap pace into our multi-lap contest today?
You go for a little more, a little earlier, using a bit more of that harder compound of the two tyres available per weekend in Formula 2 to try to steal a march. And equally, if you have a bit of a bump, not so much of an issue. You're going to have another go tomorrow.
All right, great job in qualifying. I know we didn't have a good weekend here last season, but make the best of it this time around.
And once again, we're going to go ahead and skip the formation lap, get right to the 5 red lights, starting in P10 with the regulation change that I didn't know about. So starting in P10 for this sprint race, and being pretty calm coming in to the first few corners, giving enough space between myself and the other drivers. Poor chair, almost scrubbing tires there with me as we see Martins and Behrman ahead, side by side, coming into what I believe is turn 3. If not turn 4, as I felt a lot more confident and comfortable coming into Jeddah in F2 in this year's game, especially coming through these corners. See how close we're getting into Martin's gearbox there, as I didn't realize we had another Alpine Academy driver on the grid. I thought it was just myself, and I believe my teammate of Cordu, who's back in P12, but I could be wrong, or there could be more. I'm not sure who's all in what academy, as Martin's taking back up P8. As you saw that we had that mistake coming around the corner, a little bit of a snap there as we're scrubbing against the wall, and that's not going to be the last time that's going to happen. So P9, we're up one position against Share, and feeling pretty good. Slotting into this position, coming around the I don't know what section this is, but it's the start of section 3 as we're getting up to the DRS line, not actually till lap 3. See the gap between myself and Martin's about 7/10 the gap between the few cars here, P7, P8, P9, P10. About 6/10 or so back, so like Bahrain, pretty evenly distance out for difficulty setting. And feeling really confident into this race as we wrap up the first lap into the second one. And we're not really going to get much action other than moving into the start of Sector 2. We actually push through Sector 1 really well, forcing Martins to the inside. We hold the outside line, gain as much keep as much momentum as we can. And we're going to be capitalizing on that outside maneuver, moving up into P8. So this section right here, this right-hander, fast right-hander, I had my back end coming out a lot during practice, so we have to be very careful about that corner, about spinning the car, especially in the final corner with this setup. I adjusted the setup that I did grab from Steam, and we're still on the fight for points. And we practically, I don't know how close I got to Behrman there, as we're on lap 3. You see the back end coming out a little bit. Car really wants to slide, as you can see, but it still moves with the ground. It still sticks to the ground, and we come through Sector 1 really well, closing that gap in on Behrman. Not getting DRS here till Sector 2, so we're going to try to get as close as we can to try to make a move. Being very careful on the throttle coming through these turns, because I do not want to make a mistake and slam into the wall any harder than I have. See that we broke early with the gear changes there. Coming through that right-hander and closing in on Behrman. So we're going to go ahead and hit this DRS line, and we're practically a rocket coming through Sector 2. Moving to the inside, that line is still a lot of room to work with that track limits line. Coming through up in the P7, a little scrape on the wall there, as next up is Awasa for P6. So lap 3, and we've already made up 3 positions, and it's going to be a strong fight, but Awasa still P6 on lap 7 as we're fighting to catch up. DRS active. You can see the gap between myself and Behrman already almost up to 2 seconds. There's 3 laps to go, about 3.5 laps to go. So we're coming through Sector 2. We're going to try to make that same move on Awasa. Quick move to the left on the inside. Very dangerous area to make a move here. Side by side coming through these last few corners before Sector 3. And we're going to capitalize on that move against Awasa for P6 as we go to the commentators for today's race.
It's been quite the race so far for this evening's sprint. Aside from the top 10 starting in the alternate lineup for the sprint, we still saw some position changes throughout the first lap, but the most we've seen so far is Johnson, who this time last year had a pretty rough weekend.
Yeah, I was looking back at last year's highlights, and even though Johnson performed well during the sprint, he suffered worn and punctured tyres at the start of the feature race due to last year's tyre compound regulations.
Well, so far, it seems that all of the drivers are thankful of the regulations that have been put into effect for this season. I know it's only the second race, but seems like it would be a pretty nice season to not have to worry about needing any regulations changed.
What I appreciate about this season is that the drivers must remain vigilant to keep up with the driver in front, as well as to stay in the slipstream. The gaps that form illustrate the impact on drivers when they fall out of the DRS window, which is why you often see the cars splitting into groups.
This year's cars in both F2 and F1 have capitalized on the DRS effect, which appears to be much stronger than in previous seasons. A prime example is Johnson, who began in 10th place and has since advanced to P6.
He is performing admirably in this sprint, as are several other drivers. After finishing on the podium for Bahrain's sprint and then claiming the top spot for the feature race, it wouldn't be surprising if he repeats this success. However, he still has several more positions to contend for to achieve that.
It may be premature to speculate, but given Johnson's continuation of last season's performance, I am confident he will lead himself and the team to championship titles by the season's end, but time will tell because there is plenty more racing to go before that is decided.
And you can see as we're starting lap 7 there, a little bit of a scrape moving on to lap 9 actually, as Vesti's still P4. Sanek Novalak Fittipaldi for our top 3. Really strong performance from Trident for the sprint race compared to our qualifying format. Moving on to Sector 2 for the final lap, we see Behrman up there in P4. We're still trying to fight as much as we can. We have that DRS train, a really strong and powerful DRS train. In this area, very dangerous move here, as we kind of nonchalantly give him some space again. He didn't want to be up in his gearbox with nowhere to go, especially with those cars behind me. Coming through this final sector for the sprint race, DRS is open. We have that toe momentum. We make a move on the inside. We brake late. Back end starting to come out. We put the power down. That back end is screeching. Behrman pulls away. The final corner mistake from us, and that's going to be P5 for today's sprint.
It was a tough race at times, but they've held on to take a great victory for Trident today.
Well, the sprint win's not where the big points are handed out, but it sets them up well for tomorrow and gives a lot of confidence for the longer feature.
Our drivers are making their way out for the podium celebrations, and it's going to be Trident picking up the winner's trophy. Congratulations to the entire team for coming out on top in that amazing race. After all this drama, you would be mad not to join us for the next race. We hope to see you then. Take care.
All right, we're going to go ahead and add some commentary, change it up a little bit between the races and information. A very strong race for us today. We're currently third so far with the qualifying in P1, the 5 points for the sprint. And then on to the feature race, our teammate Amari Cordial, I believe that's how you say their name. Back there, no points as of yet for them in the weekend. But yeah, so let's get to the sprint. Let's get to the feature race, not the sprint. Let's go.
Hello and welcome to the Jeddah Street circuit, where the excitement is building for what I'm sure will be an exciting Formula 2 race here in Saudi Arabia. So an interesting circuit, Jeddah. Like some other street circuits in the Formula 2 calendar, it's likely to present a formidable technical challenge, with a number of challenging turns for our young drivers to master. Plus, it's a hot track, and that high temperature has some big implications for tyre performance that they'll need to keep in mind in order to secure a good result. Let's take a look at the grid positions for today's race. Johnson lines up on pole position, with Théo Pourchaire starting alongside. Looking down the rest of the grid, we have Behrman, Martins, Ayumu Awasa and for sure. Vesti, Stanek, Fittipaldi, Clement Novalak, Deruvala, Cordial, Dennis Hauger, Jack Crawford, Correa, Miney, Hadjar and Roy Nissani. Maloney, Leclerc, Benavides and Ralph Boschon completes the grid. Now it's almost time to lights out, so let's get down to the track. It is the Formula 2 race. It is time to introduce you to Alex Brundle. I'm Alex Jakes, and we've got changeable weather out there today. That's making for some nervous team personnel down in the paddock, down in the pit lane.
Well, uncertainty is what strategy's all about, but it absolves the teams from the responsibility of running both compounds of tyre. They might have to use that wet tyre, of course, and then the question is, where do those crossovers lie between the wet and dry conditions?
Maintain a strong finish, just like the sprint. Keep the pace steady, and be mindful of the walls in Sector 2. Sustaining this level of performance could lead to Alpine offering you some practice sessions in F1 this season.
The formation lap gets underway for this, the Formula 2 race, and every driver will be looking to settle in for the race ahead, making sure the car is ready for battle once the lights go out.
All right, P1 start here as we have our possible race strategies. We're going to be running the super softs into the mediums. We're going to be coming in on lap 7, the end of lap 6, start of lap 7, I believe, as we pull up to our grid slot, and really hoping for a good race today. We had a decent sprint getting those positions. We adjusted the difficulty, so we should have a challenge on our hands for today's feature race. As the rest of the cars come up to the grid, or chair alongside me on the front row, our 5 red lights are on, and we are off to a decent start. Behrman, Martins, Iwasa, for sure, Vesti, Stanek, Fittipaldi, Novalak. That's the original top 10 from qualifying. See Vesti making a few moves there, coming through these first few corners. Porcher and Behrman technically side by side coming through that second corner. As we try to pull away, only about a half a second now coming through sector 1. We're taking it easy, so we'll most likely lose a little bit of time there to Porcher in P2. But that's just to get our settlement in through this sector, trying to get some temperature into these tires while holding on to this position. You can see Porcher is 3 tenths back already. That is all right. We have an entire race to take care of. And if we need to fight for the position this early, then we will do so. So Porcher, Behrman following closely behind, coming through this right-hander, trying to push as much as we can, see how this car reacts. Braking a little bit more than I wanted to. I was a little cautious there with those tires, as we're pushing really well through sector 2, trying to keep the car as straight as possible, holding away just so slightly with the top speed from this car. You can see we're now upwards 3 tenths behind Porcher. It's just this toe. We've seen it in the sprint race here in Jeddah. We've seen it in Bahrain. The toe is very strong, and the DRS is even stronger. As Porcher is trying to make a move on the inside, we brake late, keep him away from that. We give him space just in case that he had that momentum out of the corner. He doesn't quite yet have it, as we're coming down the start-finish straight to wrap up the first lap. And Porcher is practically side by side with us. You can see him in the mirror a little bit as we brake late. I wasn't sure if he was going to try to make a dive bomb move through these first few corners, but we're still holding on to P1 for a few laps. Lap 4 now coming through sector 1. You can see Porcher is about 7 tenths and he's gaining. We are trying to push the limits of this car. We go over the curb there, but we end up getting our back end popping out on that right-hander, and we had to let off in the runoff area in order to not receive a penalty for corner cutting. So that's Porcher on the inside fighting for P1. Behrman 4 tenths back, now 2 tenths back. You can see him in the mirror, subtly as we're coming up to this long right-hander. We hit our braking point, and you could hear the tires screeching that little snap as we're coming out of the corner, and that's about 4/10 gap here on lap 4. Behrman still close behind as we have DRS this time around, so this you can see the time gap between us closing as best as possible. It's still about 3/10, so having about a 3/10 gap for majority of the grid isn't too bad, but this is where we're able to get this car going on top speed. Pourchaire moves across the lane. He moves to the right, he moves back to the left to defend. We're forced to go on the outside. We have the DRS open, and that's an easy overtake on Pourchaire back for the lead. Making sure we don't make that same mistake. But you can see Pourchaire is still side by side with us here. Behrman 3/10 back. Martin's 3/10 behind him. Awasa, very close fight. And I'm in a battle with Pourchaire for P1, and Behrman's coming on the inside out of nowhere. He held that momentum. We're side by side coming through the corner, and I need to get through as quick as possible before Pourchaire gets away, because we're coming up to our pit stop, our pit window. Lap 6 now, 7/10 back behind Pourchaire. We're trying to keep this momentum, and we're going to go ahead and brake late, try to get with him, see him close, or us closing in on him. You can still hear those tires screeching, but it's lap 6, so we're going to come off of these tires. We're going to go ahead and swap over to the new ones and run an extra lap on the new ones, and hopefully this will be a decent undercut like last time around in Bahrain. So coming in on the new set, that's going to be a set of mediums. And once again, we have a bad launch out of the pits. And it's the same thing as Bahrain. I let out the clutch before I hit the gas just a little bit too soon. And that just messes up our pit strategy. So the races so far this season, really good. The pit stops, not so good. So we can make up that time on track. It's just if we can nail those pit stops, because I am doing the manual pit stops, we could have a much better race. So we're gonna have to wait till the end of lap 7 to see where we end up. As we're coming across the line, you can see all the positions changing in the pits. You can see everybody who hasn't pit yet. So that's Behrman, Martins, Novalak, Fittipaldi, Derula, Cordial, Carrera. I believe that's how you say it. Hadjar, Leclerc, Benavidez, and Beauchamp, who haven't pit. Pourchaire just coming out of the pits behind us. And that time's going to drop down a little bit, get some more accurate timing as we're coming through Sector 1 here on lap 8. Moving on to the end of lap 8, you can see the gap is about 1.7 between myself and Pourchaire. As everybody else in the pits, see all those position changes as we shoot back up to the lead. That big gap, and you can see the first person coming out of the pits, Vasti, coming out of the, I believe was coming out of the pits. I'm not sure. I believe it was for sure. That's the one who is coming out. I'm not entirely sure. There was a flash of color before we get to our commentators.
It's lap 9 of the feature race, and Johnson maintains the lead following a strong early pit stop, now nearly 2 seconds ahead of Pourchaire, even with some pit release mishaps.
The race's progression in his favour has afforded him some leeway, yet my interest lies in the rest of the field and their dynamics. And Trident secured a heap of points with the sprint, positioning themselves as early contenders for the Constructors and Drivers' Championships. And we can see that they're aiming for more points from the feature race as well.
Carlin is actively competing for a significant number of points as well, with both drivers currently in the points as a gap between the top 3 widens. This leaves the remaining top 10 to fight for points positions.
It's always fascinating to observe the dynamic changes in the standings throughout the season. Given the current situation, it appears to be a tight contest among 3 teams, and it would be thrilling to see this competition persist throughout the season.
This early in the year, there's a flurry of activity behind the scenes as drivers and teams familiarise themselves with their cars and programs. Reserve drivers are set to participate in practice sessions in F1 this year, and tyre testing at Silverstone is also on the agenda this year for the 2024 F1 season.
F1 teams are required to provide their reserve drivers with a certain number of practice sessions. We may get to see some of these drivers take advantage of that opportunity this year, with several reserves on the grid, including Pourchaire and Behrman among others.
Although Johnson is not an Alpine reserve, he is a member of their driver academy. Given his performance to date, I would anticipate seeing him in that car this season. It's simply a question of when, as we return to Formula 2 racing.
And it's been a very strong performance today. It was a strong performance in the sprint. We gained those positions, and we definitely have proven what we can do here in F2, especially the second season, being the #1 driver here in Virtuosi. This is the final lap. That is poor chair behind us, closing in. We're coming around these final few corners. We don't have anybody in front of us, and we hold our line. A little bit of a snap there, but not as bad as before in the sprint race. But that's going to bag the second feature race win of the season.
Nice one. Very lovely drive. On to the next one.
Ah, fantastic drive. That's just fantastic. Amazing. You deserved that race win. Well done, mate.
And Virtuosi have pulled off a great victory here today.
We've heard stories of drivers watching the race on the big screens while they're going around leading with that kind of advantage. I reckon that's what they were doing, you know, AJ.
Another race and another victory for Virtuosi as we see the drivers make their way out to the podium for the final ceremony. Superb racing out there today and a well-deserved win. And after all that excitement, I think it's time for a lie down. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you when Formula 2 returns.